You're listening to the Vocabit Podcast, where I help students improve their vocabulary for the SAT, ACT, and life itself using my unique and research-backed story-based method. On this podcast, I'm sharing the best tips and tricks for a more enriched vocabulary and pain-free test day. Hello, and welcome back to the Vocabit Podcast. I have an amazing second season planned out for you guys. It is full of big words with fascinating stories behind them. And once you hear the story, you're probably never going to forget the word. With some of the episodes in this season, like today's, it's a story I already knew and found fascinating and just wanted to share with you guys. But since I had that hiatus in between seasons, I was able to do some research and uncover the history to words that I had no idea about. And oh my gosh, some of the stories I'm going to share with you guys are so cool. Like, did you know that the word academy actually kind of goes back to Helen of Troy? Or that blatherskite goes back to Scotland and the American Revolutionary War? But I want to start here. We're nearing the end of 2020, and a lot of people are looking into 2021. And I wonder if during your planning, you've ever noticed that the names of the months make no sense. Because October starts with oct, which is a prefix meaning 8, but October is not the 8th month of the year, it's the 10th month. November, that nov usually means 9, not the 9th month, it's the 11th month. And December, dec means 10, is not the 10th month, it's the 12th month. And sometimes you see these prefixes and it's just kind of an irregularity, but there's clearly a pattern here, right? Because it goes 8, 9, 10 with those prefixes, but it's actually 10, 11, 12. And it starts before that too. September, sept, not the 7th month, it's the 9th month, you get my drift. And the answer to this question, as with so many others, you will find in ancient Rome. From the time of their founding to the time of Julius Caesar, so for about 700 years, the Romans had only 10 months, and they measured these months by the cycle of the moon. One of the main purposes of the calendar was to be able to organize agricultural activities, to be able to tell laborers when to show up. And so it made sense just to have 10 months because there are about 2 months of the year where you can't really do much to the earth. So they had 10 months starting in March, and what we would now consider January and February were just kind of empty days. They're just days before the calendar starts over again. And in a way, that already kind of answers the question, why are the numbers mixed up? Because the calendar originally started in March, because you can't really do much to the fields in January and February. March, by the way, gets its name from Mars, the Roman god of war. He's Ares in Greece. Pretty telling that their first month was named after war. But you might be curious as to how we got from there to here. And one of the biggest things that drove the change was the fact that the Romans measured their months based on the cycle of the moon. And that's actually not a terrible idea because everyone can see the moon. You don't need any technology or gizmos. It's something that, everyone has access to and it's right there for everyone to see. But there's also a huge problem with this 10-month lunar calendar. And it's that from new moon to new moon, which they would have considered a month, is only 29 days. And there's a reason why we have chosen to make our months 30 to 31 days. And it's because on Earth, we are a lot more impacted by the sun than the moon. Because if your months are only 29 days, and you do this year after year after year, over time, your calendar actually becomes a little meaningless. Dates do not really mean the same thing year after year. Eventually, April is going to be in the middle of winter because you lose a day, you lose a day, you lose a day. And the Romans knew this was a problem. They were always kind of tinkering with their calendar. At some point in here, we don't know exactly when, but at some point they added those 2 months, January and February, and they had people with the power to add days to the calendar here and there to kind of correct these issues. But the problem was that these people could be swayed by politics. If they didn't like who was consul, who was in office, you might go years and years without these corrections because they didn't want to give these people extra days in power. Another year, you might get a random extra 30 days in your calendar because they wanted more time for the guy they liked. It made things really difficult to plan in advance. So Julius Caesar comes around circa 50 BCE by our calendar. And as is his charming habit, he calls everyone out. Legend has it that while he was cavorting with Cleopatra in Egypt, he learned that we should be following the sun, not the moon, from some of the advanced astronomers in Alexandria. So Caesar comes back to Rome and he's like, "Fools, our calendar is a mess. I'm consul now, aka president, and I decree that this year is going to be 445 days to fix this." Now, imagine for a minute that you didn't like the president, and he's like, "Yeah, of course, I'm only going to be president for 4 years. But this year, year four, we're just going to add 100 extra days to the year. But no, oh my God, I'm totally only president for 4 years, but this year just has 445 days." Caesar was even more obvious in his tyranny than this. He literally called himself dictator for life. There were a lot of reasons why people thought he was trying to make himself a king. Doesn't mean he deserved to be assassinated, but he was kind of a tyrant, albeit a nice one. But anyway, Caesar corrects the calendar with one ridiculously long year, then makes the months 30 to 31 days moving forward, and he even accounts for a leap year because the number of waking days doesn't 100% sync up with the cycle of the sun. That's the Julian calendar. It is basically identical to ours. By this point, he has codified, solidified. We have 12 months. I don't know why they didn't put those extra 2 months in at the end of the year, but c'est la vie. And then, within a few years, Caesar is assassinated on the Ides of March, March 15th. And Caesar's heir, Octavian, does everything he can to build up Caesar's importance because the more important Caesar is, the more important he becomes by connection. There was a comet or a shooting star or something 4 months after Caesar's death, and Octavian is like, "Oh my gosh, that is Caesar becoming a god. That's Caesar flying up to Mount Olympus." And so then he becomes the son of a god. And it's Octavian who renamed the month that we know as July. It was originally Quintilis or something. Octavian renames that month July in Caesar's honor. Years and years later, after Octavian is full-on undisputed ruler of Rome, he starts going by Augustus Caesar. August has that connotation with, respect and old age. And he probably took that name to counteract the impression that he was this young, obnoxious whippersnapper, which is what he was when he kind of first started taking power. But anyway, he is Augustus Caesar now. And while he is still alive, he gets the month after July named after him. It becomes Augustus, or what we know now as August. August was the month in which he conquered Egypt, and it was also seen as fitting because it was the 8th month of the year, and his birth name was Octavian. So there's the 8 connection with August. It's because Augustus's birth name was Octavian. And even though you could kind of argue that the back half of our calendar, the month names really don't make sense, I don't think it bothered the Romans as much because the emperors were constantly trying to change the names of the month. Nero, the guy who fiddled while Rome burned, according to the story, tried to make what we know as April Neronius, which obviously didn't stick. Commodus, this total psycho emperor who thought he was Hercules, tried to rename every single month after his various names and nicknames. That didn't stick either, or the month October would have been Hercules, or however we would have modified it. The only months that really stuck were named after gods, time, or Julius and Augustus Caesar. January, legend has it, is named after the two-faced god Janus. He's looking forward and backwards into both years. February was a month of purification, probably related to the same root as fever, febre, February, and that's also why that's the shortest month. March, like I said, is for Mars, the god of war, originally their first month. April might be related to the verb aprire, which means to open, like the flowers are opening, or it could be kind of an old Etruscan word for Aphrodite. May probably comes from the goddess Maya, like Gaia, she's an earth goddess. June is in honor of Juno, kind of the Roman equivalent of Hera, Zeus's crazy wife. And then from there on out, you basically have the numbers after July and August. Even though Caesar more or less institutionalized the calendar that is going to be used for thousands of years after this, we don't call it the Julian calendar. We call it the Gregorian calendar because in the 1500s, Pope Gregory XIII changed it by literally a quarter of a day every 100 years. He made the tiniest little correction, and now the whole thing is named after him. But the calendar we use today, at its core, goes back to Julius Caesar and the Egyptians and the Greeks in Alexandria who helped him figure it out. We tend to think of time as a fixed thing, but it's interesting to think how long it took to get the calendar we have. And you can even see, when you look at the names of the months, previous attempts to get it right. I think it's really cool because usually when we improve something, we kind of erase the evidence of the old, less perfect versions. But the calendar is an in our face example of try again. It's probably a good lesson for planning 2021, but I'll let you decide how you want to interpret all of this. In any case, I wish you a wonderful 2021. I will be back on Thursday. Talk to you then. If you liked this episode, be sure to become a Vocabit member at vocabit.com. I share a podcast accompaniment with each episode, and depending on what the episode is, the accompaniment is going to change, but it's always going to take your learning to the next level. For historical episodes like today's, you get a video with pictures and graphics to make everything so much easier to understand. Again, you can sign up at vocabit.com, and that's VOC and then Abbott like my last name, ABBETT. See you there.